I entered the world as Naomi Marie Blackwood, became Naomi Canton when I tied the knot with Nicholas back in '81, and remained that woman until just 3 weeks ago, the day after we laid him to rest. I'm 68, my hands are a bit creaky from arthritis, but I still remember the joy of baking sourdough bread, the very bread that my son Brandon used to plead for every Sunday morning, and the sweet feeling of braiding my daughter Melissa's hair when she was just a little girl starting elementary school. I'm telling you all of this so you'll understand that before everything fell apart, I was simply a mother who believed she'd raised good children. Nicholas's battle with cancer stole him from me over 14 long months. Pancreatic cancer, that silent assassin, gives you just enough time to get your affairs in order, but far too little time to truly come to terms with it. Initially, we kept it a secret, just between the two of us. Our children were caught up in their own busy lives. Brandon, with his high-powered financial consulting career in Boston, always seemed to have a reason for missing every major holiday. And Melissa, with her string of perpetually failing healthcare ventures in Denver, always seemed to need just one more investment from her father. "They don't need this burden yet," Nicholas murmured, his gaze fixed on our bedroom ceiling, the morphine giving his voice a raspy edge. "Let them have a little more time to live their lives free from this shadow." I nodded, my heart full of love for him. But deep down, I knew better. I knew our children. When they finally arrived at our humble farm on the outskirts of Millfield, Pennsylvania, the very house where they'd grown up, the place Nicholas and I had painstakingly transformed Canton orchards from 20 acres of neglected apple trees into one of the most respected organic fruit operations in the state, they didn't bring solace. What they brought was inquiries about the will. "Mom, I'm just trying to be practical," Brandon said, his voice laced with that condescending tone he'd perfected after his first huge bonus. We were sitting at the kitchen table, Nicholas upstairs, asleep, when he first broached the subject. "Those medical bills must be piling up, huh? Have you two considered scaling things back at all? Running a business solo definitely isn't a walk in the park." Brandon bolted from Millfield the moment he turned 18, claiming that the quaint Pennsylvania town felt as suffocating as the very ground that paid for his education. He'd only visit when absolutely necessary, opting for hotels instead of his childhood bedroom because, according to him, that country air flared up his sinuses something fierce. But out of the blue, during his father's final weeks, he developed a newfound, almost touching interest in the family business he'd been so embarrassed of as a teenager. Melissa showed up 3 days later, weighed down by 6 suitcases and the distinct aroma of expensive disappointment. 5 healthcare ventures in 8 years, all fueled by her father's funds. Every single one crumbled when things got really tough. Still, she embraced Nicholas with genuinely heartfelt tears and stayed by his bedside the night before he passed, which is exactly why I struggle so much with what came next. The funeral was small, precisely how Nicholas would have wanted it. He was laid to rest on a hillside overlooking the orchard, where the spring blossoms were just beginning to bloom. There I stood, my children flanking me, as they gently lowered him into the earth, Brandon's arm a solid brace around my shoulders. Melissa sobbed openly, her face buried in an embroidered handkerchief I'd never laid eyes on before. "He's at peace now," the pastor declared. And I couldn't help but wonder if that was truly the case or just something people recited when someone finally passed after enduring so much pain. Nicholas and I weren't religious, but we upheld the social tradition of occasional church attendance, enough for Reverend Williams to focus on Nicholas's love for the land rather than any celestial rewards. What sticks with me most about that day is the silence that descended afterward. The house echoed with it as people left casseroles and whispered about Nicholas's goodness, his integrity, how he'd helped Mr. Peterson save his dairy farm during the hard times, or hired the Wilson boys when they were desperate for summer work. No one mentioned the fact that he'd built our business from the ground up, all while raising 2 children who seemed to have inherited none of his values. I unlocked the guest room. That evening, after the final guests had departed, I brought it up to Brandon and Melissa. I suggested that perhaps we could spend the next day sorting through some of their father's things together. "Actually, Mom," Brandon began, setting down his glass of whiskey with a precision that strikingly reminded me of his father, "Melissa and I have been talking, and we believe it's best if we take care of everything promptly. We both need to get back, he added. Take care of everything? As in, the estate? I questioned. Melissa, eyes glued to her phone, clarified, the house, the business. Brandon and I need to figure out the next steps. I'd been anticipating grief from my children, maybe a few shared memories of their dad. What I got instead was a boardroom meeting. On the dining table where we'd celebrated birthdays, graduations, and even send-offs, Brandon flipped open his laptop. Dad mentioned something about this last year, he stated, avoiding my gaze. He was concerned about you managing alone. The business needs modernizing, investment. The house is simply too big for someone your age. My age, I echoed, the words laced with a bitter taste. I've been running this orchard with your father for 40 years. And you've done wonderfully, Melissa chimed in that same tone she used while selling overpriced vitamins to desperate women. Mom, it's time we really started considering what your future holds, you know? A retirement community would offer you companionship, a whole new social life. I have my friends, my activities. My own words sounded foreign coming out of my mouth. This is my home now. Our home, Brandon hastily corrected. And Dad left the business to Melissa and me in his will. He wanted us to take care of you, of course, but he also knew the business needed fresh, young leadership. I just stared at my son, this stranger in a suit, who seemed to think he understood anything about the land that had sustained us, about the trees his father had nurtured through drought, disease, and harsh frosts. Show me the will. He nonchalantly slid a document across the table. It wasn't on our family lawyer's letterhead, but something printed on Brandon's company stationery. Nicholas's signature looked off. Too perfect, too firm for a man whose hands had trembled with agonizing pain for months. You had him sign this while he was dosed up on morphine. The rage that welled up inside me in that moment was primal, raw, something I hadn't felt since I'd seen a fox trying to sneak into our chicken coop when the kids were little. I chased it off with nothing but a broom and a fierce protectiveness over what was rightfully ours. He's thinking clearly, Brandon insisted. He wants us to have a fresh start with the business, a clean slate. Apparently, some developer has his eye on our land. He wants to build a luxury housing development, Melissa chirped, her eyes gleaming with the possibility of a serious payday. They're offering $7 million, she exclaimed. Mom, we could all begin again. Begin again? As if the life Nicholas and I had lovingly cultivated was some worn-out thing, something disposable. As if the legacy of Canton family orchards, our sustainable farming practices, our refusal to sell out to the big grocery chains that would squeeze our workers, the annual 10% of our harvest we donate to local food banks, all of it meant absolutely nothing compared to the shimmering allure of cookie-cutter houses for wealthy weekenders fleeing Philadelphia. Your father will absolutely not be selling this land for development, I stated, managing to keep my voice steadier than I felt inside. And I'm not signing a single thing. You don't have to, Mother, Brandon explained with a patience that felt rehearsed. The business is in Dad's name. The house too. Pennsylvania isn't a community property state, remember? That's when it hit me, they'd been plotting this all along, not just since Nicholas got sick, but possibly even before. How long had my own children been waiting for their father to die so they could cash in on everything we'd built? How many of Melissa's phone calls, disguised as check-ins on Nicholas, were actually about confirming their scheme was on track? I need time, I announced, rising to my feet. I'm going to bed. We'll talk about this tomorrow. But there wouldn't be a discussion. As I lay wide awake in the bed Nicholas and I had shared, staring at the ceiling and listening to the comforting creaks of our old farmhouse, my children were putting the final touches on their machinations. The morning arrived on the scent of coffee, the expensive kind Brandon had lugged from Boston because our local brand was, apparently, undrinkable. I got dressed with a sluggish slowness, my joints aching with both sorrow and the years, and a chilling comprehension of what my child had morphed into. They were waiting at the bottom of the stairs, a small suitcase sitting beside them. I didn't recognize it. We packed a few necessities for you, Melissa said, her voice sickeningly cheerful. Brandon and I thought we'd take you for a drive to see Sunny Pines today. It's a gorgeous retirement community, just a 2-hour drive. I won't be visiting any retirement community, I retorted, and poured myself a cup of his fancy coffee. This is my home. Mom, please be reasonable, Brandon pleaded. The paperwork's already done. We're finalizing everything with the developers next week. You can't stay here. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not a trace of Nicholas in his face. Gone was the boy who once shadowed his father through the orchard at dawn, bombarding him with endless questions about pollination and pruning. All that remained was a stranger who viewed me as an inconvenience to be dealt with. Sweetheart, could you grab my medication from the bathroom? I murmured softly. And I'd like to take a couple of photos. Of course, Mom, Melissa replied, her voice brimming with a relief that was impossible to miss. Just take whatever personal items you need. We can always ship the rest later. I took one last stroll through my home, my fingers trailing along the weathered banister, lovingly sanded and repainted by Nicholas every 5 years without fail. My grandmother's handmade quilt was spread out on the bed. There was the chair by the window where I'd spent countless rainy afternoons reading aloud to my babies. In the bathroom, I gathered my prescriptions, but also retrieved my passport and birth certificate from a secret compartment Nicholas had built into the medicine cabinet back when we were first worried about break-ins in the late 80s. Deep inside our bedroom closet, tucked behind Nicholas's collection of delightfully worn flannel shirts that still held his scent, I pulled out a small, fireproof box containing secrets unknown to my children. As I descended the stairs, my purse felt heavier, but my heart grew lighter, fueled by a resolute spirit. Brandon was checking his watch. Ready to go? He asked. It wasn't exactly a question, but I nodded anyway, and Melissa latched onto my arm, treating me like the frail old woman they seemed to want me to be. We piled into Brandon's rental, a slick black SUV with leather seats that felt like they were glued to my backside. I watched my house shrink out of sight through the back window, etching the blossoming apple trees, the weathered red of the barn, and that stone chimney Nicholas had rebuilt the summer before Brandon was even born into my memory. We cruised through Millfield's tiny downtown, past the elementary school where I used to volunteer, and the community center where I still taught quilting every Wednesday night. But instead of heading down the highway toward the larger towns with their retirement communities, Brandon turned onto County Road 27, a back road slicing through farmland before finally connecting to the interstate. 20 minutes later, he pulled the car over on the shoulder next to an empty field. The engine died as he swiveled around to face me. "This is where you get out, Mom," he stated, his voice eerily calm. "The house and the business are mine now." "What?" Melissa, bless her heart, at least looked bewildered. "Brandon, what are you doing? What did we even discuss?" he snapped. "Mom's not going to make this a walk in the park, that's for sure. She'll fight us tooth and nail, create a scene, and embarrass us about the clean getaway. Sure, this is cleaner, but she's got her medications, and a few belongings. There's a gas station only about 15 feet away. She could easily call one of her quilting buddies." He reached across me to yank the door open. "Out, Mom." I gazed at my son, desperate for a flicker of the boy I cherished, but he was gone. Then, I turned to my daughter, her eyes wide and fixed on us, her mouth opening and closing like a gasping fish. "Melissa," I questioned, knowing the answer before the words left my lips. "She would be going with him. She always did." "I'm sorry, Mom," she breathed. "We just really need the money. I have debts." I simply nodded, grabbed my purse and the small suitcase they'd packed, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The spring air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh earth and the promise of rain later. Clutching my purse tightly, I watched as Brandon drove away without so much as a glance back, Melissa's pale face a ghostly blur in the rear window until they crested the hill and vanished from sight. No phone, no money, or so they thought. All I needed was my name and whatever they hadn't clawed away from me. That was the moment it hit me, I wasn't alone. I was finally free. Free from pretending these people deserved my love simply because I'd given them life. Free from the crushing weight of maternal obligation toward children who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. I started walking, not toward that gas station Brandon mentioned, but toward a future they couldn't even fathom. Tucked inside my wallet were my passport, medications, and a deed. The original document for 20 acres of land still under my maiden name, acquired long before I ever married Nicholas, back before the Canton family orchards had ballooned. 20 of the most lucrative acres, as fate would have it, including water rights any developer would kill for. My children thought they'd left me with nothing. They were about to get a very rude awakening. The walk to town took nearly 2 hours. My shoes, sensible flats I'd worn to my husband's funeral, weren't made for rural roads. By the time I reached Miller's Gas and Grocery on the outskirts of Millfield, my feet were blistered, and the afternoon sun had scorched my neck. I couldn't have cared less. Suffering has a funny way of clarifying things, and with each breath I took, my purpose sharpened into focus. I didn't rush inside. No, I perched on a bench outside, simply observing the trucks and cars as they came and went. These ordinary folks, living their ordinary lives, had no idea that Naomi Canton, the woman who judged their apple pies at the county fair for 2 decades, had just been discarded by her own children like roadkill. Mrs. Canton? I glanced up to see Ray Miller, the third-generation shop owner, wiping his hands on his apron. You all right? You look a bit shook up. Just resting, Ray. It's been a long day. He nodded, his eyes flickering to my suitcase. I'm real sorry about Nicholas. He was a good man. Yes, he was, I agreed, straightening my spine. Ray, could I borrow your phone? I seem to have forgotten mine. Sure thing. He ushered me inside, past the beer coolers and snack displays, towards a cramped office behind the counter. Take your time. I didn't phone any of my snowbird pals, as Brandon had suggested. No, I called Vincent Hargrove, our family lawyer for the past 30 years. Naomi, I was trying to get in touch with you yesterday. It floored me that he was absent from the will reading. My grip tightened on the phone. A will reading, of all things? Vincent paused for a long beat. His son presented a document, but I have concerns. Anxiety gnawed at me. I've been trying to reach you. I'm not well, I managed, my voice steady even as anger simmered beneath the surface. Vincent, I need your expertise and complete discretion. You possess both. My office. 1 p.m. I'll be there. I'd gotten a burner phone, cheap and paid for in cash, stashed away in a compartment of my wallet. Emergency money that Nicholas had insisted we both carry after a flat tire stranded us years ago. I also snagged a water bottle and a sandwich, which I couldn't bring myself to eat. Ray refused to take my money. Going home now then, Naomi, is there anything else you need? Just say the word. His kindness almost broke me. So damn close. But I hadn't shed a tear when they lowered Nicholas into the ground, and I wouldn't start now. Vincent's law office was tucked away on the second floor of a Victorian building on Main Street. The moment his secretary spotted me, her eyes widened. Mrs. Canton, Mr. Hargrove is expecting you. She hurried from behind her desk. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? I'm fine, Helen, thank you. Vincent met me at his office door, his tall, thin frame stooped with age, but his eyes remained as sharp as ever. A year younger than Nicholas, he'd handled the incorporation of the company, our wills, all the legal stuff in our lives. Naomi, he guided me to a leather chair, then sat not behind his desk, but on the chair next to me. Tell me what's going on. And so I did. The conversation after the funeral, the suspicious will, the motives, the neglect. With each detail, Vincent's expression darkened. The will they gave him, he said when I finished, isn't the will Nicholas and I prepared last year. Their document is a fake. Which I suspected. I opened my purse and pulled out the fireproof box. From within, I extracted the original deed to the 20 acres. They don't know about this. Vincent examined the paper, nodding slowly. Clever. Very clever. You two were always thinking ahead. It was Nicholas who suggested putting this under your maiden name when we first expanded. He referred to it as insurance, you know, in case the company went belly up. Well, now there's another kind of insurance at play. Vincent gently slid the document onto his desk. Naomi, he asked, what's your game plan? I met his gaze head on. I'm going to win back my house. I'm getting back the business my husband built from the ground up, and I'm ensuring my kids finally grasp the magnitude of their actions. My frigid tone didn't faze Vincent. He simply nodded. First things first, let's find you a roof over your head for tonight. My sister runs a B&B that has an opening. We'll kickstart the legal proceedings tomorrow. No, I countered, shaking my head. I need to act with more urgency than that. The developer seals the deal next week. Suddenly, comprehension flashed in Vincent's eyes. You're not planning to simply go through the court system, he realized. The courts are for people who have time to spare. Vincent, I have a much better plan brewing. That night, cocooned in the floral wallpapered coziness of Rose Hill bed and breakfast, I made my first phone call. Not to my children. They might be curious about my whereabouts, or maybe wondering if I'd even made it to town or just collapsed by the roadside. I reached out to Harold Winters, the regional director at Pennsylvania Trust Bank, where the Canton family orchards had been a valued customer for years. Harold, I'm so incredibly sorry for your loss, Mrs. Canton, he said. Thank you, Harold, I replied. I'm calling because I've uncovered some disturbing transactions, and I really need your expertise to safeguard what's left of our family business. My next call went to Martin Adams, the agricultural extension agent who'd been working with us for a good 15 years. Naomi, I was at the funeral, but it was so crowded, I couldn't get a word in with you, Martin began. I know, Martin, it was complete chaos, I responded. Listen, I need the scoop on a potential property development brewing on farmland in the county. What can you tell me? My third call went to Sophia Delaney, editor of the Millfield Gazette and my second cousin through Nicholas. Ellie, how are you holding up? She asked. I've been so worried sick. I'm managing, Sophia, but I think there's a story brewing here that you might find incredibly interesting. Developers, preserved farmland, and inheritance shenanigans, I told her. By the time midnight arrived, I had placed 7 calls, each conversation working as a single thread for this ever-growing web. Outside my window, the tranquil streets of Millfield slumbered peacefully, completely unaware that Naomi Canton, always known as the peacemaker, always known as the nurturer, of all people, was now warily plotting her revenge. Bright and early, I met Vincent at his office, armed with a stack of notes. I need you to freeze the business accounts, I told him, point blank. And file an emergency injunction against any property sales based on that fraudulent will. Vincent scanned my notes, his eyebrows shooting up. This is quite the comprehensive plan. After 40 years with Nicholas, I knew that business inside and out. Every deal, every client, every tiny facet, it was all mine. I leaned forward, a determined glint in my eye. And I'm going to use every bit of it. I fully expected his kids to fight this tooth and nail. I'm counting on it, actually. By midday, things were already starting to happen. Vincent had submitted the request for the emergency injunction. Harold put a hold on the business accounts, pending investigation into suspicious activity. Martin also contacted the Environmental Council about protected wetlands smack dab in the middle of the proposed development site. As luck would have it, those wetlands bordered a 20-acre plot of my own. I sat in Vincent's office, watching the clock tick towards 10 p.m., waiting for the moment my stepchildren realized their meticulously crafted scheme had hit its first snag. My brand-new prepaid phone, with a number no one should have known, buzzed to life. But Vincent had clearly made sure they got it. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice steady. Naomi speaking. Mother. Brandon's voice was thick, a barely suppressed rage simmering beneath the surface. What have you done? I couldn't help but smile, even though he couldn't see it. I'm just getting started. Mom, please be reasonable. Brandon's tone was edged with desperation. You can't just freeze the accounts and file a cease and desist. Do you have any idea what this does to our agreement? Brandon's voice was tied over the line. Your agreement? I retorted, correcting him. Not mine, not your father's. Where are you? Melissa's shrill voice cut in. Clearly, Brandon had put me on speaker. We've been worried sick. The lie hung in the air between us, a poisonous cloud. They hadn't called the cops. No reaching out to friends. They'd been far too occupied finalizing their betrayal. Worried I survived? I inquired, my voice perfectly even. Concerned I didn't conveniently disappear? That's not fair, Melissa whined. Looks like Brandon messed up big time. Shut up, Melissa. Brandon barked out. I just grinned at my cracked phone screen, ready to play hardball. Listen up, Buttercup, I began. I'm offering you a chance to walk away with something, anything. Undo that bogus will of yours. Sign the business and house contracts back over to me. And in return? A cool $50,000 one-time payment for each of you. Then, we are done. Brandon let out a nasty chuckle. You're delusional, he sneered. You have nothing. The will is airtight. It's fabricated. Vincent interjected, leaning closer to the speakerphone on the desk. As the attorney who actually drew up Nicholas Canton's real will, I can attest to that. A long, heavy silence filled the line. You've got 24 hours, I declared. After that, the offer vanishes, and I'm proceeding with fraud charges. I hung up before they could even sputter a response. Vincent leaned back in his chair. You know, they'll probably refuse. I'm counting on it, I retorted. I stood up and grabbed my purse. Now, I need to make a trip to the bank in person. The next 24 hours were a total whirlwind of paperwork, frantic phone calls, and hush-hush meetings in back offices all over Millfield. Folks who've stuck with me through the years, and know the bond between Nicholas and me, rallied with tips, endorsements, and solid backing, not out of sympathy, but from deep respect, and maybe a hint of schadenfreude watching those Canton locals, who ditched their hometown for flashier spots, finally face the music. As dusk settled in, I made my way to a snug little pad perched above Lucille's lively bakery. Lucille Brennan, my landlord and longtime pal since our kids first set foot in kindergarten together, welcomed me warmly. Stick around as long as you fancy, she urged, slipping the key snugly into my palm. That kid of yours has never treated this town right, or you and Nicholas, for that matter. To my astonishment, I dozed off peacefully that night, cradled by the comforting wafts of fresh bread and pastries drifting up from downstairs. By morning, I threw on the jeans and fitted sweater Lucille had kindly lent me, steeling myself for the showdown ahead. Right at 9 a.m., when the property office flung open its doors, I filed the documents to stake my claim on that original 20-acre spread, encompassing the main house, the outbuilding, and, most crucially, the water source that any developer would covet. At 10 a.m., I recently sat down with the Agricultural Council to discuss those conservation rights that Nicholas and I discreetly championed years ago. These tough restrictions could make any development practically unthinkable, even if Brandon somehow pulls off a sale against the odds. By lunchtime, I was chatting with Sophia at the Millfield Gazette office, sharing insights for their feature story titled Local Orchard, The Essence of Our Legacy. Developers' blueprint battle puts safeguarded farmlands in jeopardy. Then, around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed yet again. The deal's off the table, I jumped in without a proper hello. Mom, you're heading straight for a disastrous mistake. Brandon's voice had lost its cool, morphing into sheer panic. The developer's legal team is threatening lawsuits if we don't honor our commitments. Sounds like that's his headache. Or is it ours? Melissa cut in. Mom, I'm pleading with you. I already used that upfront cash to settle some debts. If this falls apart, I'll be totally wiped out. You should have thought twice before ditching me on the sidelines. It was all Brandon's scheme, she sobbed. I had no idea until we were already cruising down the road. The betrayal they shared left me utterly unfulfilled. Nothing about this ordeal brought me any real satisfaction, just a stark, essential chill of justice finally taking hold. Bank statements revealed she had pulled out $50,000 just 3 days before her father Melissa's funeral. I kept my tone icy and detached. So, you've already mapped out your fresh start, haven't you? She broke into sobs. Those anguished wails were all too familiar, the ones she let out whenever things didn't go her way. It's far too late for tears now, I pressed on. Vincent will deliver the documents. Both of you need to sign, relinquishing all claims to the Canton family's orchards and estate. In exchange, I won't pursue charges of fraud, deliberate mistreatment of the elderly, or theft. What about that $50,000? Brandon inquired, his sharp business instincts still crunching the numbers. That deal is off the table, I shot back. You're simply walking free, and that's the end of it. I hung up the phone, slumped into the chair, and gazed out the window of Vincent's office, the place where I'd poured in my entire adult life. Across the street, the bustling farmers' market was springing up, just as it did every year. Folks were hustling through their routines, exchanging hellos with neighbors, inspecting goods, and embracing everyday lives where kids never ditch their moms on the wayside. Vincent chimed in with a smirk, setting the teacup right next to me, they're bound to clash. Just let them hash it out, he added. I ignored the teacup completely. I still had one more call to place. I punched in a number I'd locked away in my memory for decades, though it rarely saw the light of day. Robert, it's Naomi Canton speaking. I feel it's finally time to reach out and lend my support. Robert Wilson had shared a dorm with Nicholas back at Penn State, well before either of them ever met me. Their bond stayed strong even after Robert packed up and moved to Philadelphia to launch one of the biggest real estate law firms in the state. 3 decades earlier, when Robert's first business crumbled, Nicholas had bailed him out with a crucial loan. That infusion of cash transformed it into a powerhouse firm now famous for dismantling shady developers. Naomi, he responded, his voice glowing with fond recognition. I'd been itching to call since I first heard about Nicholas's situation. I'm truly sorry for everything. Thank you, Robert. I could use your expertise in this tricky spot. I spilled all the details, the deception, the betrayal, and the developer involved. Robert hung on every word without chiming in once. And when I'd wrapped up, the silence stretched out so endlessly that I started to wonder if the line had gone dead. Finally, he burst out, his voice thick with barely contained fury, I'll be heading to Millfield first thing tomorrow morning. Those developers over at Platinum Acres have been squarely in our sights for ages. Naomi, their plans are trampling all over at least 6 environmental rules. We've been battling to shut them down. And now, you've got the perfect opportunity. Absolutely. I could hear him rustling through his papers in the background. Hold off on signing anything until I arrive. And Naomi, I'm truly sorry about your kids. I've cut ties with that part of my life just 3 days ago, I shot back. Now, all I have left are adversaries. That evening, I settled into Lucille's cozy kitchen as she wrapped up at the bakery, sipping tea while watching her mix dough for the next day's bake. You really ought to nibble on something, she urged, gesturing toward the fresh sandwich she'd whipped up for me. You've got to keep your energy up. I'm not feeling the least bit hungry. Ever since Nicholas passed, my appetite has vanished completely. Food's just basic sustenance these days, nothing more. I listened to Melissa chatting about Millfield right there in Lucille's space, her hands moving with effortless skill as she kneaded away. Brandon's still hanging around at home. Folks are buzzing with gossip. Let them chatter away. The whispers in a small town always rattled my children before, but now, they're turning into a real advantage for me. I always catch wind of their every move within hours, never missing a beat. Lucille pressed on, noting that Sophie's article is slated to drop tomorrow. The front page even fielded a call from the Philadelphia Inquirer. They're itching to break the story, something about the developer tangling with other projects. I nodded along, totally unfazed, as Robert's call had just solidified my hunches. Platinum Acres runs a shady scheme, zeroing in on vulnerable landowners, especially seniors, with vows they have no plans to honor. Was I on the right track raising them the way we did? That question slipped out before I could rein it in. It wasn't some sentimental nonsense, it was genuine intrigue about where I might have slipped up. Lucille's hand stayed put in the dough. You and Nicholas were stellar parents, Ellie. Some folks just turn sour, no matter the ground they're sown in. I nodded, taking her words to heart and shoving aside that pointless doubt. It doesn't hold any weight now. The past is locked away with Nicholas. All that's ahead is the future and my drive for retribution. Early that morning, Robert Wilson, dressed to impress in a sleek suit that likely cost more than 3 months' earnings from Canton Orchard, strode confidently into Vincent's office, with his 2 colleagues right on his heels. He wrapped me in a brief hug, then swiftly shifted gears to the task at hand. We'd already filed for an injunction against those English platinum samples across 3 districts, and now we were adding yours to the mix. For the next 2 hours, I was captivated by a true expert in his element. Robert didn't just grasp the law, he wielded it like a finely honed blade, sharp, exact, and utterly relentless. By midday, he'd crafted documents that went beyond simply blocking the sales, they could even trigger a full state investigation into the developer. We need your son's signature, he declared, sliding the papers over to Vincent's desk. We had to get them to officially drop their claims tied to that fraudulent will. Vincent pointed out that they were digging in their heels and refusing. Oh, they'll sign, I replied with absolute conviction. They just need the perfect nudge. I fished out my phone and placed another call, this one to Thomas Winters, Harold's son and the assistant district attorney. Thomas, it's Naomi Canton. Let's dive into the idea of filing criminal charges. Robert arched his eyebrows in surprise, staying silent as I quickly organized a meeting for that very afternoon. The moment I ended the call, he gave an approving nod. He's always come across as far tougher than Nicholas ever realized. I clarified that Nicholas fully understands my own steely resolve. Yet, he never imagined I'd have to turn that strength against our very own kids. Just after 2 p.m., my phone buzzed again. It was Brandon speaking in a stiff, no-nonsense tone. We're set to sign the documents, he said, but we need a formal written guarantee that you won't push forward with the accusations. I already suggested that yesterday, I replied. The conditions have shifted now. What exactly are you looking for? I pressed. He sounded utterly deflated, and that didn't give me any satisfaction. Be at Vincent's office by 4 p.m., I told him. And make sure to bring Melissa, that's when I'll outline my requirements. When they arrived, I was positioned squarely between Robert and Vincent, creating a formidable team of legal expertise. My children looked completely worn out. Brandon had skipped shaving, his fancy shirt all rumpled, while Melissa sported smeared makeup and a ponytail thrown together in haste. Neither one dared to meet my gaze. Have a seat, I directed, pointing to the chairs across from us. This process will fly by in no time. Robert slid the papers across the table with a purposeful shove. Mrs. Canton has generously opted out of pressing criminal charges for the counterfeit will, the shady fraud, the mistreatment of the elderly, and that audacious bid to snatch business assets worth about $12 million. In exchange, you'll both need to sign these documents, admitting the will is a sham, and waving goodbye to all claims on the Canton family's lush orchards, their cozy home, and every related asset. Brandon quickly flipped through the pages, his face draining of all color. This spells out that we're giving up every last inheritance right. Exactly, I said with a straightforward nod, but Melissa chimed in next. It's precisely what you tried to pull on me, I jumped in to wrap up her point. Except with one key twist. I'm offering you a clean, legal way out, not abandoning you out in the cold. Mom, please, Melissa's voice cracked with emotion. I get that we've tumbled into a colossal mess, but let's call it quits right here. I lifted my hand to halt the conversation. This isn't open for bargaining. Sign now, or I'll march across the street to the district attorney's office and file those charges. Thomas Winters is already waiting on my call. As soon as I brought up the assistant district attorney, Brandon's already pale complexion turned ghostly white. He knew Thomas from their high school years, that overlooked local guy he'd once dismissed, who's now soared way ahead of him. Did you really go through with it? Putting your own child behind bars? His voice dripped with disbelief, as if the same woman who whipped up his favorite cookies and patched up his childhood scrapes could never turn so icy and unrelenting. The one who always forgave you everything met her end on County Road 27, I shot back, keeping my cool. You left her in the dust. Brandon glanced away first, then snatched the pen Vincent held out. His signature wobbled but was still clear enough. Melissa dragged it out longer, her tears spotting the page as she scrawled her name. So, what's the next move? She murmured quietly. Now, you're both heading out of Millfield, I announced, scooping up the signed papers. Make it today for both of you. If I catch either one in this town again, I'll slap on charges no matter what you've agreed to. And what about the developer? Brandon pressed, grasping at one last straw. Robert offered a faint smile. Platinum Acres will get the official word that this property was never on the market and isn't now. They'll soon get a heads up about our plans to slap them with a lawsuit for their shady involvement in what seems like a calculated scheme to dupe a grieving widow. They slunk out in total silence, their shoulders sagging under the burden of defeat. I peered through Vincent's window as they each headed off to their own vehicles, Brandon making his way to his rental car, and Melissa striding toward that eye-catching red convertible Nicholas had pitched in to buy her last year. Not a single one glanced back at the office. No eye contact between them at all. That's wrapped up, Vincent murmured softly, tucking the papers away in the safe. But we're not quite done here. Not quite done. We've clinched the legal skirmish, yet the bigger battle, my personal fight, still had one last chapter waiting. Mind giving me a lift? I asked Robert. Where to next? Home. The Canton farmhouse appeared unchanged from the day I left just 4 days earlier. The white paneling shimmered in the fading afternoon glow. Nicholas's old rocking chair still sat on the front porch, right where he used to while away his final days, soaking in the sight of the blossoming orchard. The only new thing was Brandon's rental car parked in the driveway. Want me to tag along inside? Robert offered as he pulled up behind it. No, I'll take care of this on my own. An eerie silence hung in the air inside the house. I moved through the ground floor, noticing subtle signs that things weren't quite right. Brandon's laptop sat on the dining table. Beside it, a half-finished glass of whiskey lingered. Muddy shoes were carelessly discarded by the door, a habit he would never have done when he lived here. Brandon? I called, my voice echoing through the rooms that had witnessed 40 years of my life. Silence. I ascended the staircase, my hand gliding along the banister Nicholas had personally carved the very first year we lived here. At the top, I spotted a sliver of light spilling into the hallway from our bedroom. Pushing the door open, I found Brandon standing by the window, his back to me as he stared out at the orchard. The room was a disaster, dresser drawers pulled out, the closet doors flung wide. Nicholas's belongings were scattered across the bed we had shared for 4 decades. Looking for something? I asked, my voice laced with ice. He didn't flinch. Didn't turn around. I knew there had to be something more to this. Dad wouldn't have left everything to him. His father had trusted me, something he clearly had never learned to do. Finally, he turned. His face was contorted with something between rage and despair. He left a trail of devastation in his wake. Deals had crumbled to pieces because of him. Melissa's creditors were breathing down her neck. My company was launching an investigation into my unexplained absences. Every action, it seems, has a price to pay. So, is that all this is? I asked simply, a lesson to be learned? A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. Even now, he just couldn't help himself from teaching. Not a lesson, I countered, correcting him. Justice. Moving toward the bookshelf, I selected an antique, leather-bound edition of the Rose Walden, Nicholas' favorite, the book he used to read aloud to me during long winter evenings when the children were asleep. From within its pages, I produced a sealed envelope. Your father penned this for you the week before he passed away. My intention was to give it to you after the funeral. Brandon snatched for it, before I recognized the monster you are, but I held it back. Do you even grieve for him? I questioned, or were you far too occupied with scheming to profit from his death? Something flickered across his expression, ever so briefly. Maybe he was mortified. Or perhaps he was simply irritated at being caught red-handed. I adore Dad. You cherish what he represents, I corrected. The security, the prestige, the safety net for all of your risky endeavors. So, what is it this time, Brandon? Another disastrous investment? Gambling debts? His silence spoke volumes. Your father cultivated something that could have thrived for generations if you'd only had the patience to nurture it. I tossed the envelope onto the bureau. Instead, you tried to hawk it off for a quick buck. The orchard business is dying a slow death, he snapped. Dad's too stubborn to see it, too attached to outdated practices. This development would set you up for life, I finished, all while obliterating everything your father holds dear, everything I hold dear. You could have a cushy retirement, a condo in Florida. Nothing to worry about except the gnawing feeling of knowing I allowed my husband's legacy to be bulldozed for vacation homes. Brandon shook his head as if I were the unreasonable one. Even now, he just doesn't get it. Take the letter and get out, I said. Read it or don't, but either way, this is the last time you'll ever step foot in this house. He snatched the envelope, shoved me aside without a single word, and disappeared. I stood frozen, listening to his footsteps echoing on the stairs, the slam of the front door, and the roar of his rented car speeding away. Only when the sound completely faded did I finally sink onto the edge of the bed, surrounded by the wreckage of Brandon's final intrusion. But I didn't shed a tear. Tears had dried up long ago, ever since that moment on County Road 27 when I realized my children had become strangers. Instead, I started to tidy up, carefully folding Nicholas's flannel shirts that still held his familiar scent, gathering the scattered photographs, and restoring some semblance of order to the chaos my son had left behind. As darkness began to creep in, I wandered into the kitchen and brewed a cup of tea, carrying it out to the front porch where I settled into Nicholas's rocking chair. Above, the first stars began to prick holes in the deepening spring sky. Below, the orchard stretched out into the darkness. The trees we had planted together were now tall and thriving. My phone buzzed. It was Vincent checking in. I'm home, I told him. Brandon's gone. And, you're there alone, he replied. I've been alone since Nicholas died, I answered. The change is that the truth has finally dawned on me. I'm perched in the same chair 3 months later, captivated by the summer sun setting over an orchard overflowing with ripe fruit. This year's harvest promises to be extraordinary, possibly the most bountiful ever. Though I might not be as actively involved. Lisa, the new manager I brought on board, Martin Adams' daughter, no less, has proven her worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucille. Front page news again. Thought you'd want to see. The attached image revealed the Philadelphia Inquirer's business section. The headline screamed, Platinum Acres CEO indicted in fraud conspiracy. The subheadline hinted at the Canton family orchards, noting they were the spark that ignited the investigation, ultimately uncovering a massive elder exploitation network spanning 3 states. I tossed my phone aside, feeling nothing but quiet satisfaction. Justice, not vengeance, though perhaps the distinction is finer than I thought. Another message pinged, this one from an unknown number. Mom, please. It's been months. Can we talk? Without hesitation, I deleted it, just as I had with the previous dozen. Turns out Melissa decided to reach out after the scandal broke. Everything she owned, her car, her apartment, vanished as creditors snatched it all away to settle debts, pinning their hopes on striking gold with the sale of the orchard. Brandon never bothered to reach out, though Vincent heard he'd been forced to resign from his job once his involvement in the fraud investigation came to light. My kids were getting a brutal education in life's harsh realities. Some bridges are simply too charred to ever rebuild. Some betrayals cut so profoundly that forgiveness feels impossible. As darkness settled over the orchard, I gently rocked, absorbing the sounds of the night, the crickets' chorus, a distant owl hooting, the creak of the porch swing against the weathered boards. Resting on my lap was a notebook where I'd started sketching out plans for the Canton family orchard's future. A farm-to-table restaurant in the old barn, educational programs for local schools, expanding our organic practices. Nicholas would have loved these ideas. We'd tossed around similar dreams before his illness consumed our conversations with treatments and pain management. "I'm doing this, Nicholas," I whispered into the night air. "Everything we envisioned, everything they tried to tear down, it's only made me stronger. Tomorrow, I'm sitting down with the lawyer to officially launch the Nicholas Canton Agricultural Scholarship, a fund fueled by the very profits my children schemed to steal, all to support local students chasing a future in sustainable farming. Next week, the inaugural Community Harvest Dinner is happening, a gathering of the wonderful neighbors and friends who rallied around me precisely when I needed them most. And on calm evenings, you'll find me right here in Nicholas' chair, watching over the orchard we built together. The legacy will endure, even without my children involved. It'll be as resilient and strong as the trees themselves. Not alone, just finally, free. This is my story. Some might see me as rigid, even unforgiving. Some may even deem it cruel to completely sever ties with my own flesh and blood. But remember what I said at the beginning. The betrayal from those closest to your heart leaves a brand, a wound that changes you fundamentally. It burns away sentiment and forges something tougher, something infinitely more clear, in its place. My children made their choices that day, back on County Route 27. I continued on my path, day after day. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'm curious, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you offer forgiveness, or would you want me to pursue justice instead? But no matter how you feel, remember this: some people mistake kindness for weakness, until they learn, often too late, what real strength truly looks like.